Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I'm Ian Whitaker. I'm the Assistant Director for Leadership Programs at the Chicago Council, and tonight I'm training my replacement. The Council is delighted to have partnered again with the Museum of Science and Industry. You guys always bring the coolest stuff to our programs, and we're very grateful to the Museum of Science and Industry and to our panelists this evening for contributing to the exhibit. So before we begin, welcome to social media, but please silence your phones. And we are also live streaming tonight, so you can watch this at home or you can watch it later on. Really quickly, the Council has an exciting agenda of events coming up in the next few weeks. Some highlights include December 4th, Pulitzer Prize-winning author John Meacham will be talking about his biography of George H.W. Bush. On December 8th, we'll have a panel discussion in collaboration with the U.S. Holocaust Museum on Syria and the global refugee crisis. And then on December 12th, environmentalist Mama Aletta, who's returning from the COP21 talks in Paris, will talk about the role of indigenous populations in fighting climate change. The Chicago Council and MSI are both public education institutions, and our work is funded by the generous support of our respective donors and members. So to learn more about membership, please talk to myself or one of my colleagues or visit our websites. Turning back to tonight's program, after the panel discussion, I will moderate an audience Q&A. But now to introduce our panelists, please join me in welcoming the Head of Industry and Retail at Google Inc., Mr. Ted Suter.
Thanks, Ian. This is yeah. He's really distracting. This is the first time I've shared a podium with a robot, but it's particularly appropriate because we have a great program for you tonight. So I'm delighted to be here this evening to welcome you guys and welcome our panelists. It's a really special collaboration between the Chicago Council and the Museum of Science and Industry. And I hope you guys had a chance to spend some time with the robots out front. Really, really neat examples of technology in action. Google is actually a supporter of the exhibit at the museum, so we're really, really proud to play a role. Robots and just overall technology is super important to us, and we think there's just a lot of great things coming down on the pike there. So today our panelists are going to discuss how robots have advanced far beyond simple industrial tasks to providing critical functions in areas as diverse and sophisticated as disaster response, patient rehabilitation, and autonomous vehicles. And at Google, we know a little something about autonomous vehicles, so hopefully we'll hear a little bit about that tonight. But like all revolutions, the robot revolution will have a profound social implications as well. I think maybe Terminator or something. So hopefully we'll talk about that as well. So let me introduce our panelists, and then I'll get off the stage. So we have Brenna Argel. She's the Assistant Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at Northwestern. We have Henrique Christensen, is the Distinguished Professor and Kuka Chair of Robotics at Georgia Tech and the Executive Director of the Institute of Robotics and Intelligent Machines. Robin Murphy is the Raytheon Professor of Computer Science and Engineering at Texas A&M University. And tonight's moderator, Kurt Hunfeldner, is Vice President for Exhibits and Collections at the MSI. So thank you, and let's hear for our panelists.
Well, welcome, everybody. It's great to see such a fabulous turnout. You know, I'm a President's Council member with the Council, and I have to tell you, in comparison to the roster of Council events Ian just referred to, most of which are heavy-duty topics of big issues going on all over the world, robots should be a lot of fun tonight. And we've got a really fabulous panel to help us have this conversation. The way this is going to work is we're going to have a little dialogue up here for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to throw it out to you. So we'll have plenty of time at roughly 6:40, 6:45 to take questions from the audience. So I hope you'll take full advantage of that. So welcome. I'm really excited to be here because we've got the great honor of having three of the leading roboticists in the country with us tonight, each of whom has their own particular expertise, but each of whom is also involved today in the heart of the most important elements of what robotics represents. So things like autonomous devices, AI, robot learning, robot cooperation, robots working with humans, which I think is going to be a really key element of what we're going to talk about. And these folks are right in the midst of this evolution. So I want to start with this question. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask a couple of questions to all the panelists to get us going, and then we're going to break it down a little bit, and then we'll go to you. So this one's for everybody. You know, you can hardly pick up a newspaper or magazine these days without robots being front and center in the headlines. And in fact, I just had to hold this up. This is the July-August issue of Foreign Affairs, a magazine that probably many in the audience read and are familiar with. So it leads to an obvious question. Are we in the midst of a robot revolution? And if so, what does that really mean? And along with that, what's the biggest misconception that you think the general public has about robots? Who wants to start?
Do you want to start?
Why don't you?
Sure.
Well, because I'm thinking of the Industrial Revolution, and you are so, have seen the manufacturing, the impact on the economy.
So to me, there's no doubt we're in the midst of a robot revolution. Traditionally, we've thought about robots very much from the factory floor. That's why we've seen them in the first 50 years. Mm-hmm. And then we've seen them in Hollywood in the movies where we have a very sort of non-realistic view of what robots really do.
Both ends of the spectrum.
But we're breaking it out now into a lot of different areas where robots are being used. So typically we would say there's in the workplace, there is assistance to people in their daily life, and there is sort of assistance for disaster recovery and those. So we would say manufacturing, services, healthcare, and disaster recovery. And we're starting to see we're using robots to do exploration where no man has gone before, like going to Mars, which is an important part. So we're very much going from the old robots that are replacing labor in the factories just for this, to empowering people to do things they couldn't do before, whether it's building smarter airplanes or cars. I would like people to be able to stay longer in their homes. So I have this vision by the time I retire, I would like to have a robot that will allow me to get out of bed, get dressed, prepare a meal, and go out into the world. And I might not have a lot of mobility.
Sounds
I
like
might
life could
have
be
poor
easier
memory
then.
and all sorts of things. It would empower me to do those things. And at the same time, I would like to have a car that can take me to wherever I want to go. And as we grow old, our vision deteriorate. I'm a little bit worried about, can I drive at night?
Sure.
We're going to get vehicles for that. So I think we're in the middle of that revolution of going away from the factories to, it's going to be everywhere.
Okay. All right. Brenna, Robin, you want to?
Yeah, I think to build on that, I think that, again, I always think of it as like industrial revolution and the manufacturing. And we've seen this, the robots have been it's hard for me to think of it as a revolution, except in the sense of people are now beginning to accept it. The technology has been building for over 40 years.
Right.
And what looks like overnight progress, overnight success is not, is you're just harvesting it. So I think it's really, maybe perhaps in the sense of an intellectual revolution, that you have the confluence of people with economic needs, the technology, the cost has been driven down, the computing costs, the sensors have become miniaturized, and also the perception of the variety of applications, like you alluded to. That's no longer a replacement, a welding robot in manufacturing, but things that can enable us to perceive and act at a distance, as well as assist with us one-on-one, as well as manufacturing.
Yeah, and I would just add to that I think the revolution has started, but the explosion we're just at the cusp of. So many people have likened the state of robotics right now to, what?
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, many people have likened the state of robotics right now to where computers were maybe in the late 70s or the early 80s, which is that they're being used in specialized industries. A couple of people have them in their homes for very specific tasks, like a Roomba or something like that, but it's not being widespreadly used the way computers are today. And even with where computers went, we got to the point where they started showing up in people's homes very regularly in the 90s and in the early 2000s, but now people have multiple devices, they're in your pocket. And once we get to that point with robotics, we're going to have people who are not the engineers actually designing the way that these things are going to work and placing needs on it, and that's going to also be totally game-changing, but that is still a fair bit in the future.
Okay. So it's fair to say that robots have a very wide technology footprint. They encompass everything from drones to UAVs to exoskeletons to industrial automation. What are the common attributes? In our Robot Revolution exhibit at the museum, we have sort of 3 anchor characteristics: plan, sense, and act. Is that the essence of it? Is that an oversimplification? At the crux of it, how do you define a robot?
Well, there's really 4 primitives. It's plan, sense, and act, and learn. Okay? So we've always thought of biological intelligence, insect intelligence, as being behavior is reactive, and that's your sense and act together. And then deliberation, cognition, the things that really make us special, or at least what we think makes us special. You think of planning and being able to sense and act, or sensing and planning and acting and putting those 3 together. But learning is pervasive. We have different styles of learning, different algorithms for different levels. But it's all 4 components that put together to really make an advanced system.
Okay.
I'll give a different view.
Sure.
So to me, robots are really about actuation. How do we physically interact with the world?
Okay.
And if we look at most of the industrial robots are really dumb. You know, the IQ is 0 in terms of they're very good at doing sort of repetitive motion over and over again, but there's really no feedback. So then we're starting to see sensing, which is really about how do we do the perception. And it's only very recently that we've started to build on the intelligence axis and give them any kind of intelligence, which is both the planning and the learning. And then, unfortunately, I can't do a 4-dimensional space. And the 4th one is sort of interaction. How do we interact with people? Traditionally, we put robots in a cage and said, you do this. And I think the revolution we're seeing right now is how do we empower, how do we use this to interact with people, whether it's the exoskeletons or it's the Roombas or the handicap needs. So we really need to think about robots along those 4 dimensions. And it started out just being mechanics. Now we have all of those other aspects. And we got cheap compute power, much better sensors. And we're starting to, in stuff like, for instance, Brenna's doing, much better understand how do we build relationships with people.
So Brenna, is it fair to say that this sort of extraordinary convergence between the sophistication of the mechanical device, computing power, which continued to grow by Moore's law and exponentially, and our ability to design algorithms and control systems, that those things, and sensor technology, are coming together, and it's the convergence of these elements that's really driving this really powerful change?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the things.
And that's evident in your work.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that's hard about robots, is that you need all 3 of these things to work and work well. And so if you only have if one piece is missing, then your robot doesn't work. And so it's really, if we want to have these systems now interacting outside in the real world with people who are not robotics experts, who aren't engineers, who need these robots to help them, they need to be super robust. And to get those robustness, you need that convergence.
Okay, so I want to flip this over for a second. Share a little personal story. So 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I'm looking at Kathleen McCarthy, who's on my staff. We started a relationship with a robotics firm out in California, which I believe has now been bought by Google, called Willow Garage. Am I correct? Maybe one of the 8. You know, Google's bought a lot of them. In any event, I remember looking at a YouTube video that showed the PR2, which was a very sophisticated robot, fold a bath towel. And I watched this video, which took about 8 minutes. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. It's a little slow, but you know, it's got potential. Well, what I discovered not long after was that it was actually a time-lapse video. That this folding the towel sequence actually took 50 times longer, about 6.5 hours. So I'm curious, are we overplaying this story? Is the hype ahead of the performance here? Anybody want to take that on?
Sure, I'll take it on. So,
for you to be stuck momentarily.
No. But I think there's no doubt what we do in the research labs is most of the stuff we do in the research lab is not ready for prime time. It's not ready to go out for product, and we shouldn't be at the universities. We should be. So that's a robot that's at the University of California, Berkeley.
Right.
But I think at the same time we are seeing robots that have amazing performance. We're starting to see autonomous driving cars. We're starting to see, which is not only driving in time-lapse traffic, drives in real traffic. You know, so I think we are getting there. But it's true. There's a lot of the stuff that we see out there, which is so. I think we have to be careful about it, and we have to be honest brokers about what is real and how far away are we. And I still think we're far away from general intelligence and all of these things that we see in most Hollywood movies. But we are making tremendous progress.
Okay, so we've got eminent thinkers like Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking, Bill Gates, all sort of warning us about this dystopian future where robots potentially become our overlords. I mean, obviously, that's years down the line. Is that, is that real? And how do you guys evaluate that? And what does the public need to know about that? Should people be concerned?
I think it gets back to your previous thing about hype,
Yeah.
okay, versus what we actually know. Thinking about autonomy, confusing autonomy, a cockroach has autonomy. It has limited intelligence, great intelligence if you've ever tried to kill one, right? You know, little suckers go, right? They don't have much initiative. They don't jump out of what their role in life, literally what their role in life is. And so this hype about how somehow we're going to do this is just really annoying. And you start looking at the fundamental theories of artificial intelligence that have been unchallenged since Herb Simon came up with them in the 60s about bounded rationality. You're not going to have systems, AI systems, that can exceed its rationality. It's bounded by its compute power. We're bounded by what we can think about, what we can make out of this very complex environment. It governs our economic decisions, which is what Herb Simon, one of the founders of artificial intelligence, got his Nobel Prize for, was for economics. So the idea that we're going to create things that are going to have some sort of magic bullet, you know, silver bullet like learning, and it's just going to somehow go beyond, out of the box. No, not really.
Anybody else?
So I agree with Robin that if you go into any research lab, give me 30 seconds, I can break any robot. It's very easy to do. So once you go in there, like, you know, so it's very easy.
We've learned that too at the museum. Yeah.
Right. I can imagine. With 35 robots on there, that's really tough. So they're very fragile, but also I think it's ours to make sure that we communicate in a way, and we teach our roboticists, for instance, about ethics. What is reasonable to expect and what's unreasonable to expect. And as educators and as researchers, we have a very important role to make sure that we communicate this and we kill some of the hype, because there is way too much hype about this.
And the hype's beginning to get really self-serving. And you talked about, Brianna, of people, oh, well, they won't know about robots and they'll start creating with them, which is what we're seeing with the UAVs, the small UAVs. And this oh, look, my UAV flew off. Well, how was I to know? It's autonomous. It's because you wrote the frigging problem. Just because it's non-deterministic, there are methods to test for that. Get off your tail and learn them. Being new doesn't give you any excuse saying, well, you know, that. So.
Yeah, and to build onto that, I mean, we struggle today to get robots to learn exactly what we're trying to teach them. And that's always the crux of it, is that they're running exactly the code that you wrote. And you would actually have to try to build it in to have it, and it would actually be a big coup if this could even happen in the first place, that it's sort of self-evolving.
So to give you an example, one of the guys that was actually on the team that started Google's autonomous driving, Sebastian Frun, he was at Google for a while and now he's running Udacity. He has a Tesla and he downloaded the autonomous driving program, and 10 minutes later he posted on Facebook and said, I've never been so scared in my life. I turned it off immediately. And that's sort of where we are, you know, when even some of the founders of this technology are saying, it's not ready for prime time.
Sure. So you hear a lot of buzzwords thrown around like AI, deep learning, machine learning. Is there a clear definition to what represents the capacity of a robotic device to learn from its environment? I also read, for example, recently about a research project that involves Brown and Cornell, where they actually have two PR2s, and they've got these robots set up to do different tasks, but they're working off the same programming language and the same set of algorithms, and the notion is that over time these robots will develop an intelligence that exceeds the intelligence of either one by virtue of the feedback loop between those two systems. Is that real? What's AI all about? And what's the trajectory of the smart part of what a robot represents?
So determining being smarter than you were before, the purpose of learning is to improve your performance. Okay. And it does include new term learning, but things that you've never encountered. But again, it's bounded by, you can think out of the box, but first we have to kind of program the box a bit for you to get out of it. So it'd be no surprise that these systems would evolve and become better at their task, immeasurably, demonstrably better than when they started. So I think it's really, but thinking about learning is, learn what? It depends. We learn so many different things. Is it learning to read? Is it learning, which is a very cognitive, very deliberative, symbol-driven versus learning to drive, learning how to throw a ball? You know, those things, you've got to break those out. It's not, you can't just put them all in one category.
But it's also, and I think there's some aspect to it in terms of how do we transfer knowledge from one robot to the other. So we're starting to see this very much with the evolution of what is called cloud computing or cloud robotics, where you have big shared models. So as an example, there's really no need for every robot to learn to recognize all the objects in the world. If you go to various cloud storages, you might have 10 million different objects out there. As an example, any object you can buy in an IKEA store, there is already a model in the cloud. So, you know, good news, you know, I don't have to sit down and learn this. So I think we are starting to leverage this where we'll, you know, I would like to have it so I can give a robot a tour of my home. And then, you know, one day I might buy a new refrigerator and the robot should be smart enough to come and say, I don't know what that is. And I can say, don't worry, it's an Electrolux 3711. And he can go on the net and say, has anybody else before me interacted with a 3711? And says, I have. And then you can get a model. So I think we are starting to see sharing of knowledge so you don't have to start from square one every time.
Okay.
Except disasters are very different. And if you pull off the images off of that and try to run through the deep learning, you're screwed.
I agree.
So let's shift gears a little. I want to talk about robots in the workplace, and I want to talk about some of the positive social benefits of robots. So Henrik, I'm going to start with you, and then Brent, I'm going to go in your direction. Henrik, Merrill Lynch just released a report that said essentially 300-page, very exhaustive report on robotics, just came out last week. And the essence of it was, it said that within 20 years, literally 45% of all manufacturing jobs in the United States could be replaced by a robotic device. Boston Consulting Group last year did a similar study that said that robots would be capable within 20 years of performing 60% of all the typical work that's done on a factory floor. So I want you to take the counterpoint, because there's a lot of fear about this. That fear is sort of undirected, but it's real. What's the positive story? Tell me about robots that can improve employment opportunities, and what are the fields and where are the areas where you see that coming to life?
Well, so I think there are lots of, so it's a very well-founded fear, and there is no doubt today robots are displacing jobs. There are jobs that's going to be replaced by robots. Heavy lifting, non-economic jobs, those are hopefully all going to go away. But on the other hand, we're seeing jobs, for instance, where we do precision assembly, where we do things we couldn't do before, that will partly use robots, it'll partly use people. So we'll see entirely new job categories come around that will allow us. So we didn't used to have robot programmers. We didn't used to have sort of how do I build new ways of operating with these? How can I, you know, now we have robotic surgeons that can do surgery we couldn't do before. So we're going to see new job categories getting created that will allow us to do this.
Do all those require a college degree?
Absolutely. Well, some of them will require a college degree. I don't think everybody should get a college degree. I think that's sort of the wrong direction. Coming from a state where a lot of people don't even get a high school diploma, trust me, we have a little bit of way to go. But even those people will have an active role. If you look back 10 years, 15 years, we didn't have social media directors. We didn't have all of these. So I think we are going through a technological evolution that is naturally creating jobs. If you go back and look at the automotive industry, 100 years ago, they were all built by blacksmiths. Then we designed the assembly lines, and we created assembly line workers. So the blacksmith was put out of work, but we created a new category. I think we're seeing this.
So we've always had
e-commerce is coming in right now and building entirely new ways of doing job categories. So I think we're seeing. The hard part for people is it's hard for them to see what is the next job I'm going to get. And at the same time, I think we are afraid that a lot of the new jobs seem to be more attractive to the 20 and the 30-year-olds. So somebody like Mike, like me, who's above 50, you know, how do I know I'll have a job 10 years from now? Which is a little bit scary. And there I think it's important we have to look at how do we create a society where there is room for new job categories. So rather than just being sort of the main machine stormers and saying we need to stay with the blacksmiths. No, we need to figure out what is the future society. How do we want to shape it?
So we're going to invent those jobs in the course of inventing the technology.
Exactly.
And the applications of the technology.
Lots of really cool.
You're an optimist.
I'm very much an optimist, and I think we're doing a lot of things. So one of the things is we're going to see significant aging over the next 25 years. We can't all be social workers.
Right.
So how do we provide technology for this? There's going to be a tremendous opportunity.
Sure.
It's going to be robot operators. So we're starting to see this now. We recently built a car that can actually be driven around over the internet. So imagine, you are at the rental car store and somebody in the office can move the cars around in the parking lot. That's a new job description.
Right.
Parking assistant for autonomous cars.
Okay. Brennan, let's shift to another really positive story, which you're right in the heart of these days. I had the pleasure of visiting Brenna's lab over at the Research Institute last week. Thank you so much. And what I saw there was very, very exciting. Brenna is involved in leading a research program, not just involved in it, she's driving it, that is intended to use assistive devices to support people with physical disabilities. But the premise, if I understand it, Brenna, is quite different. Instead of the user adapting his or herself to the machine, your premise is that the machine, through a variety of these technologies, will adapt itself to the user. Tell us about that story.
Yeah, that's
Which,
right.
by the way, and thank you for bringing the wheelchair tonight.
Yeah, my pleasure. We have our robotic arm out there as well. So one of the premises in my lab is that we have a lot of assistive machines out there who are, that are difficult to control for any number of reasons because of people's physical impairments. So you have this confound where the exact people who are supposed to be benefiting from these machines aren't able to operate them. And so we introduced Robotics Autonomy to help offload some of this burden from the user to the robot. Now, what was just being talked about with the adaptation, we expect that how the control should actually be shared between the human and the robot is a moving target. And the reason why is because we expect that the person is changing over time. So they might be in rehabilitation and gaining more function, which would be wonderful. They might have a degenerative disease and be losing function over time. Humans also will just naturally adapt to something. And so it might be that they're changing in how they operate the machine. Or it could be that they want different levels of assistance on different days or even within a given day based on things like fatigue or pain. And we want our assistance level to be adapting to them constantly. And we think that this actually is going to be really fundamental to getting these machines and these assistive robots adopted in wider society.
Brenna, one of the things you said to me last week was that you've got this narrow window of opportunity that lasts roughly a year from the time the user engages the technology to the time where they may be resistant to it because they've learned certain adaptation strategies and the technology now they see as potentially getting in the way or not being terribly useful. Talk about how you work in that window and how your research is directed towards trying to maximize the value of this interaction on the front end.
Yeah, so that's something that they've seen in the adoption of myoelectric prostheses, that often it's a year after injury that you have a window in order to introduce new assistive technology. So one of the ways we can do it is by actually customizing the amount and type of assistance that we give to the person. So if you're someone who's not comfortable with technology and you want to feel largely in control, but we can just introduce a little bit under the hood to make the problem easier, then that might be the right solution for you. It could be some people that are very pro-technology and they're willing to adapt later. And then it's that we can have it be more aggressive and changing all the time so you get the most assistance or the minimal amount of assistance that you want. But this whole idea of actually being flexible is really how we can work within that limited time window.
Brenna, this question is directed really towards all the young aspiring roboticists in the audience. I'm sure we've got quite a number of them.
Yeah.
I was fascinated by the pathway, somewhat circuitous, that you took that started in math. Actually, I think it started before you even went to university with an interest in medicine, if I'm correct, and then Carnegie Mellon mathematics, and then robotics, and then a period of time at NIH working on cognitive brain research, and then going to Switzerland and working on algorithms related to learning, and then coming back to the United States. It's a fascinating story. How did you wind up where you are today?
Yeah, so I guess the 2-minute version of that was that I started out studying mathematics. I actually probably should have studied engineering, but I didn't know any engineers, and so I didn't really think to major in that. Started out with mathematics. Also had an interest in medicine, so I started taking all the pre-med courses, which added a minor in biology. I also had a minor in music. That was just a personal interest. And then at some point I decided that instead of just doing an MD, I would do an MD PhD with the PhD in medical robotics, though actually I had never touched a robot or done anything with robotics, but it sounded interesting. I decided if I'm going to do this whole research thing, I should find out if I even like research. So I did a program at the NIH directly after my undergrad for 2 years, and I was picked up by a neuroscience lab because they wanted my math skills. I didn't know anything about neuroscience. Then I applied to graduate, or while I was there, I actually decided to drop the MD. I decided I only wanted to do research, and that the medical part would just be a personal interest that I kept on the side. I applied to graduate schools. I decided to go back to Carnegie Mellon and was in the Robotics Institute. At this point, I still had never touched a robot, but I was now getting my PhD in robotics. And as I was talking to potential advisors, I realized that the type of robots that I wanted to work in didn't exist yet. So we didn't have nanoscale robots yet. We only had microscale robots. So I switched over and joined a lab that did robot soccer, and that kind of morphed into robot learning. That actually stayed stable when I went to Switzerland. I was working on a different robot platform, a humanoid robot now, but still doing robot learning. And then I got hired to start a lab at Northwestern in rehabilitation robotics. So it sort of unintentionally came full circle back to the medical domain, though I wasn't actually trying to have it happen that way. And I guess for all the young people out there looking, my take-home message would just be that circuitous paths work.
So if you're a medieval philosophy major in the room and you aspire to be a roboticist, there's still hope, right?
That's right.
Okay. So Robin, I want to come back to you for a few minutes. I should tell everybody in the room, Robin Murphy is regarded across the country as one of the leading experts in the field of disaster robotics, which sounds really heavy duty and serious, and in fact it is. And Robin's research is really in the vanguard of trying to develop systems and technologies that are available to first responders. Robin starts with the idea, and I want you to talk about this a little bit, that saving 1 day in first responder response time to a disaster on the front end potentially saves 3 years in terms of the recovery of an ecosystem or an urban environment or whatever the case may be. Talk about that, Robin. I mean, that just struck me as amazing.
Yeah, that's a standard rubric from the social sciences, that 1 day, you think of your disaster phase as 1 day in any of those phases can save 10 days in a later phase. So if you think about it this way, if you have a disaster's happened, you've got people on the site, they've got to figure out what's going on, they've got to mitigate the spill or the levee breaching, save lives, figure out what's going on, and then until they can get that squared away, that phase is ended. You can't go in to restore the electricity and the power. You can't get your claims insurance and your roads rebuilt so people can come back in and move back in. And until people can move back in, have the restoration, they can't go back to school, put your kids back in school and go back to work. And if you can't go back to work, then you can't have your life and you don't have your tax base and you don't have that. So it pretty much all comes down to anything you can do. So not only is it, can you cut off just 1 day of that initial response, which in most disasters is usually about a week to 2 weeks. In Hurricane Katrina, it was a month before they got that initial span there. So not only does it take a day off of here, which shortens all these others there, but can you also start using the fact that the robots can go places and see things and record? Can you start taking things that normally we wouldn't have shared with the insurance companies, would have had to come in and do that survey again because the responders had to come through once to make sure it was safe for them to go in. Can you now move that down and do things simultaneously?
Sure.
So we're seeing huge potential to transform.
So you've talked about early in the game, and by the way, Robin has been on site for I think at least 20 fairly large-scale disasters over the last 10 or 15 years, 9/11 in New York, Katrina, the Oso mudslide in the state of Washington a couple of years ago. And you've done a great deal of work on trying to not only enhance the technology. You say, for example, with Katrina, part of the challenge was, could the UAV stay up in the air long enough? But now it appears to be moving much more towards, can you aggregate the data and can you get the appropriate data in the hands of the people that can use it as quickly as possible? Talk about that.
Yeah, it's not about the robots, it's about
Okay.
the data.
Okay.
And so our work started in disaster robotics in 1995 and really became famous with the first use of robots for disaster, which was 9/11. And even then we were seeing that the robots physically, going back to you, were good enough. But it was the user interface was causing huge barriers. They were taking too many people to use, too much confusion. Mm-hmm. People didn't understand, and then nobody wanted to buy them because they didn't understand how much training. Mm-hmm. So now we've evolved, worked on the human factor side, and for a while there it was about 51% of all the terminal failures where a robot would fail in place during disaster was due to some type of human error. So that numbers are coming up and looking better. But now what we're finding, the robots are working well, people are there. But now you've got literally a flood of data. So you're not getting the insurance companies seeing what the public works is seeing, what the urban search and rescue is seeing, what the disaster management. An example in our Texas floods is that the same data could have been used for search and rescue to try to rescue people who are being flooded out, but also help ESF3, emergency support functions. They divide them into public works so they can see what roads are going on. But at the same time, the ambulances couldn't figure out what the right roads were. There was no social media to update, and it takes 24 hours for the state highway patrol to update road closures. So all of this data could have been shared, should be shared, and that's the real trick.
Are you making progress?
Yes, and there's so much more to be done, though. Okay. And it's back to that confluence.
But Kurt, it's amazing to see how much we've seen a revolution, not only with robotics. So to take an example, I'm sure you've all seen the forest fires that go on in California.
Sure.
5 years ago, I went out and talked to the firefighters, and the way they literally figured out where the fire was that every day the firefighters would come home, they would draw it up on a map, they would fax it to a central place, and they would all put it into one big and fax it back. And then you would drive out and say, oh, the fire moved. Like, hello, you know. So until we got social media, they didn't have no way of aggregating the data, which is really dangerous for the firefighters.
And then you start looking at the firefighters. So they go into a cycle of where, because you have so many groups, a disaster will have a minimum, and this is pretty much worldwide, 28 groups. You've got them scattered all over. You can't be 100% sure of communication. So what they'll do is they'll physically deliver the information to them in a hard copy to everybody on site at 6 in the morning. And they'll stop work because in the United States, the laws require them to stop work at night because it's just too dangerous, workman law. So you've got this 6 to 6 period, and they were like, look, we don't care about UAVs during the day. If we can have UAVs to watch the fire and from angles that we can't get from the satellite, and you can get that information up to 2 a.m. when we have to go to press, that would be the game changer. And so here, it's not about building a better UAV with more power or more actuation. It's simply getting the right match for their information needs.
Okay. So you've got a simulation lab down at Texas A&M where you teach called, I think, Disaster City, which fascinated me because I used to work at Disney for many years, and when I saw Disaster City, I immediately thought of a Universal Studios attraction. But your Disaster City has a very serious intent to it. What is it? How does it work? And how do you engage your students in that?
Well, Disaster City is my favorite place on earth, and Texas A&M has been training firefighting and response since 1929. Okay. They built that particular facility. They have 4 major facilities at A&M, but this is about 100 acres of every type of structural engineering, urban collapse. So this is to train urban search and rescue teams, and they train all 28 of the FEMA teams there. And so it's interesting to me and my students is because it's still what we call human habitable, places where you probably wouldn't use a robot because a person could get in there, and if there was somebody dying, these people have sworn to save their lives. They will run in and get you. But if it won't work there, it's not going to work in the extreme
Do you
conditions.
bring in first responders to?
Oh, all the time. We have a chemical train derailment there, and we said, look, guys, we really need to understand how our user interfaces are working with the UAVs and this, you know, can you give me, with the train derailment, we'll set it up, and you can set up, can you give me people who've done hazmat? They gave me 28 people who had all managed a major hazmat, and then one who had been with a railroad company who was cleaning that up. So it's high fidelity. I love it.
Wow.
So I have to tell a story about, we just had a PhD student that was actually studying how well could you use robots to guide people during disasters? And it was really scary. So we set it up as a scenario where, imagine you would be here and you would be taken to a hotel room, and then you had to go and do a test of reading a paper. And then we simulated a fire. And at the exit, there was a robot, and it would point you in the direction of an exit. And we had two different robots. We had reliable robots, and we had unreliable robots, so, you know, a confused robot. And so you would think that people would follow the reliable robots and say, but the unreliable one, I'm not sure. 98% of the people trusted the robot no matter what. In some cases, they were pointing to a dead end. And I said, sure, we'll go to the dead end. I was like, stop.
Yes.
You know, so it's a little bit scary. We trust our technology way too much. So that's one of our missions also, to figure out how can we help them, but how can we make sure that we can tell them, I'm lost.
Good point. We have about 5 minutes, and we're going to throw it out to you, so you might start thinking about your questions. Henrik, I want to come back to sort of the 30,000-foot level, and I want to ask you just a question or two about policy and about competitiveness, because you've been engaged in this pretty seriously for some time. So as you know, in 2009, there was a national report that was produced by 9 of the leading universities, Carnegie Mellon, Georgia Tech, MIT, and others, called A Roadmap for U.S. Robotics. It was updated in 2013. The premise of that report was basically that robotic technology will become ubiquitous in the United States. It is now, and it will continue over the next 10 to 20 years. Where are we today, particularly when you think about the adoption of robots in Asia? China, for example, is leading the way. I know you know this. And they've got reasons to, a declining population and the one-child policy, all the rest of wages are rising. But are we losing our competitive position in the United States because they have more of a necessity than we do? Or are we maintaining our advantage because of our ability to innovate?
So the short answer is yes. The long answer is, so we built a roadmap for the particular reason that using robotics and automation technology, we can start bringing jobs back that had gone ashore. So we've seen Lenovo, Apple, other companies starting to use robotics technology to bring jobs back that we thought had gone to Southeastern Asia and they were gone forever. So that was one of the premises. We can use robots to make it much more accessible. We are living in an economy that has an extreme degree of customization. So to give you an example, Audi comes in 10 to the 31st different car variations, which is just ridiculous. You know, there are 256 different steering wheels. You know, so you can, I'm like, really? You know, so, but to be able to accommodate in that kind of economy, we need to be able to manufacture very close to the customers, and we need to be able to have this very high, extreme degree of customization to be able to do this. Same time, we're seeing the technology being used to help people in their daily lives, and we can help them through technology like Brenna's doing at a reduced cost of healthcare. And I don't think anybody is trying to look for increased costs in healthcare these days. So we are seeing this evolution in the US right now. On the other hand, we are seeing a tremendous investments in Southeastern Asia today. They can only compete with us if they have a higher degree of productivity than they have today. And they're saying robotics is going to be one of those. So the fastest growing market for robotics today is China. It is also, so they are already the biggest market in the world and the fastest growing market for manufacturing. In terms of healthcare, I would say it's still Europe and US that's leading that. Also in terms of surgical robotics, we are ahead. But I think they are making both Europe and some of these Asian countries are making much bigger investments in robotics technology than we are. So there's a risk that long term we will not continue to have the innovation lead.
Yes,
That's right.
no,
We're
do
losing our seed corn.
We
Exactly.
got, just quickly, do we need a national robotics policy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we
Do we
partly
have one?
We need more we need money, not just
but
policy.
we need more than that, and I think it's more exactly than, you know.
Policy is paper.
Right. No, we need real investments, and that's where I'm worried about that. We're investing in creating new companies, but we're not investing in the basic research that will allow us to continue to have the innovation lead.
One
We're
last
losing
question,
that.
and then we're gonna go to you guys. I want you to put on your prognosticator's hat for a second. When you think about biggest opportunity, biggest challenge, biggest risk, and let's do this quickly. I just want you to do it top of mind over the next 20 years in this big field of robotics. Biggest challenge, biggest opportunity, biggest risk. What would you say it is?
The biggest challenge is correctly matching the technology with the missions. The biggest opportunity is going to be the small things, the things like making robots as ubiquitous at disasters as a fire truck, where you don't notice the technology because it fits so perfectly.
Okay, biggest risk.
Biggest risk is that the hype will scare off people into thinking, well, you know, the PR2 robot takes forever to fold. Well, how can I expect a disaster robot or a healthcare robot to do any better? So I'm not even going to try.
Okay, Henry.
So to me, the biggest risk is that we're going to build technology that doesn't match people. We need to empower people. So I live in a state in Georgia where 42% of young people do not graduate high school. I can't afford to build robots that can only be operated by people that have a college degree.
Sure.
I need to be able to build technology that will empower these people that don't have this. I think the biggest risk is that if we're not careful about how we deploy this, we will get some early disasters in terms of adoption, and everybody will say, been there, done there, that doesn't work, and that would really kill it for us. So
Biggest opportunity.
We need to be really, really slow. To me, it's autonomous driving cars. It's such a big deal. My own prediction is that kids born today will never drive a car.
Oh. Okay, Brenna, bring us home.
So I'll maybe focus it within my domain specifically rather than robotics
Sure.
as a whole.
Sure.
So I think that probably the biggest opportunity and challenge maybe it would be helpful to have a hallmark that we've kind of done both of them. So I think actually once robotics autonomy is a part of insurance reimbursement, that'll be a hallmark that we've kind of made it, because it'll mean that it's not only robust enough and reliable enough that it's out in the general world, but also that it has been proven to be effective enough and helpful enough and cost reducing enough that it's actually a part of your insurance forms. That if you are getting fit for a powered wheelchair, one of the options, like your seating options or your driving interface option, your robotics autonomy option is a part of it. And I really think that getting to that point will be very difficult, but also that'll be a mark that we've made it.
Terrific. Ian, you want to pick it up from here?
Well, a round of applause for our panelists, please. So now it's time for some audience questions. If you have a question, raise your hand. We have microphones in the audience, and please make sure your question is a question. Back there, the pink shirt, second last row, please. Paige, thanks.
Well, that was pretty interesting. My question is for you, Robin. How would you see robotics or drones being used, not just say for big disasters, but for day-to-day emergencies?
There's so many ways to use that, and we're looking at law enforcement is using them in limited amounts. Fire rescue is using them. Structural inspection, trying to prevent disasters, looking at your critical infrastructure, your pipelines, your bridges, road conditions. So the sky's the limit.
That's a good
No, it's
point.
not even the limit.
Next question. The gentleman there in the blue jacket, Paige. Thank you.
Will there be robots that can replace a soldier on the battlefield in Afghanistan or in Iraq? And is the Pentagon supporting this?
So there's an ongoing discussion about, so to give you the numbers, at the height of the intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan, we had 25,000 robots deployed in theater. 12,000 on the ground and about 12,500 in the air. The real is none of them were, or very few of them were weaponized, and none of them were autonomous. So we were seeing this, that there's still a person sitting at the end of it with the trigger, primarily for the aerial systems. But we are seeing a lot of robots being deployed for all sorts of assistance, whether it's logistics for carrying the arms, whether it's for doing early reconnaissance. So we've already seen very, very large deployments of robots. The big discussion is an ethical discussion about, should we allow these robots to carry arms, and how autonomous should they be? In the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, there are robots deployed that are fully autonomous and that carry a machine gun, which is scary.
Yeah, shoot on sight.
Wow.
Samsung.
Are they ours or are they the South Koreans?
They're South Koreans.
Samsung.
Yep. So that's scary, and I think it begs for a number of ethical questions we need to address.
In the second row here, the lady in the front, second row, thanks.
Thank you for your brilliant perspectives. I have one question. You talked about a lot of innovation that's happening across all fields. My question is related to policy and rules and laws. So do you think that the legal infrastructure will actually keep up with the innovation that's happening in your space? Or do you think there's going to be any barriers in the next 5 or 10 years because of lack of transforming rules and laws, et cetera?
Oh, there's huge barriers today. So if you look at it, one of the obvious one is that we have the technology today where we could deploy autonomously flying vehicles in civilian airspace. There's really no technical reason for it. FAA has not opened up for this. So it's not a technical barrier anymore, it's a legal barrier, and Congress has mandated that FAA find a solution. 2016, they haven't. So that's a big barrier for, so if Robin wants to deploy her vehicles, there's a lot of legal framework involved in this. We need to be able to do this. And clearly we're going to have a big legal framework around autonomous driving cars, and we are seeing this. So in the factory, we're relatively, we're in good footing. It's moving slowly, but it's moving. But for these new areas like autonomy, big deal and very difficult.
And what's really challenging is that we work with the Bush School of Government at Texas A&M, is that the policymakers have nothing to go on, right? So they're not coming from a strong science background. The areas of autonomy, computer science, these are very advanced concepts. And so it's a very difficult one you just don't pick yourself up with, robots for dummies and get to make policies that have high economic and personal consequences there. And so I think that's why I really like the idea of when you get to the insurability, when you can give things with numbers and accountability, that makes everybody so much easier.
We could put in a pitch for your book right here. This is Robin's book, aptly titled Disaster Robotics, and it's a great read. So wish we had him here, but I'm sure it's available on Amazon and lots of other places.
Yep. Right. Next question. Paige, the lady in the black there, please. Thank you.
I was just curious whether you all are concerned about the possibility of these autonomous things being hacked. The more they are on the internet.
Absolutely. No, it's very important, and I think it's very important so the question was, are you worried about these systems getting hacked? It's a big challenge, and we need to make sure that cybersecurity is a first-class citizen when we design these systems, because if they are getting hacked, it could be very dangerous, and we've seen this for autonomous driving cars are starting to get hacked. There are examples of UAVs that's been taken over. So it's very important for us to consider cybersecurity as a first-class citizen, not an afterthought.
Next question. Just with the green jumper, please.
Hi, you mentioned, alluded to the lack of money or needing more money for investment in research. I'm curious, and you also touched upon the ethical questions. I think there was an article recently in MIT Review that talked about autonomous driving cars and algorithms that come into play when an accident is about to happen. And could you comment on what degree of the investment goes into the ethical aspect of robotics?
Good question.
Okay, so
Go for
there's, so ethics gets a big term, but you can think of the ethics of the morality of making a decision, but there's operational morality that impacts engineers and product designers. And I think what you're talking about is what is the decisions that go into the operational morality, how reliable did you make your system? Did you oversell and mislead people so they use it incorrectly? Versus this is going to grow up and take over the world, or this is going to suddenly change and run over people instead of avoid them. So operational morality is probably not emphasized as much as it should because it's something that we haven't pushed and are now pushing in our engineering classes in colleges, but it's typically not been emphasized. What do you?
I would say today is probably less than 5% of the overall investment. But going forward, we've seen this. So for instance, in manufacturing, we've gone from a phase of dumb robots to collaborative robots, and that has created a tremendous economic growth. And this has motivated the industry to say, if we open this and we think very carefully about the right framework, this is an economic enabler. So for that reason, I think you're going to see it grow to 15 to 20% relatively quickly.
Next question, Lauren, just the lady there in the second row.
Thank you also very much. So as we talk about collaborative situations, what's the human quality that we should really enhance and try to develop more strongly so that we really do collaborate with these machines and vice versa?
I'll start, and then so typically we would have said about robots that they do the dirty, dull, dangerous jobs, in terms of very repetitive jobs, very simple jobs, and that's still true. So the robots are good for the heavy lifting, the high precision. If it requires any level of intelligence today, the robots are typically not very good at it, and that's still where we're getting into how do we do this. So as an example, one of the areas where people think about here, there's a tremendous penetration of robots today, is in automotive. There are 10 car workers for every one robot deployed. We have the robots in the plate shop, in the welding shop, and in the paint shop. Once it sort of goes into assembly, where you have these 10 to the 31st different variations, robots can't do it. So as soon as we have complexity, that's where we have the people. So I would say creativity, complexity, reasoning, we're far away with the robots. And that's where we need people.
And I think partly, if we think about, I think part of your question was also asking how can humans kind of be better teammates with robots or collaborators. And I think that actually what's going to be really key to that is human understanding of what the autonomy is actually able to do and what it's supposed to be doing, which is one of the big problems, I think, with all these videos that have come out with the Tesla automation, that people weren't trained on what to expect when the autonomy can actually do things. You actually need to be trained almost to interact with these. Humans are very, very good at adapting and learning. And so I think as long as the system is transparent enough to them, they will naturally adapt to interact with it quite well. So the question is getting that transparency at the right level, which is a lot of what Robin was talking about with the amount of information you give to the human as well. That you can't flood them, you can't overwhelm them.
Yeah, that whole principle of visibility has been known since the 70s in human-computer interaction, and we seem determined to rediscover why HCI had discovered that was a fundamental principle. But yeah, I would agree, the visibility, to understand the role that the robot, what am I doing, what are you doing? And then, yeah, okay, got it. And we can mutually support that.
Great, next question. Gentleman there, Lauren, in the grey.
Thank you to the panel. So we all know what we envision in our imagination of robots being able to do in 100 years, in 200 years. And we hear about autonomous cars coming out and Elon Musk making his predictions and you saying people born today, and I think Musk said a similar thing, people born today may not end up driving. And we've heard, I think, from Brenna, this maybe is the 1970s of robotics, but is that really, what are the timelines? What are the real timelines that you guys envision? Are we going to see it? Honda's been working on the robot for home assistive care for, I think, ever, and we saw, oh, here's the robot coming out on the stage and walking, but are they going to make it in time for the baby boomers in Japan to help them get out of the bathtub? So what are the real timelines? Thank you.
I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this because I actually find it very difficult to predict. I think so many things actually go into it. If we think about what actually enabled the computer revolution, it wasn't the development of the first computer, right? It was getting the technology cheap enough and small enough and where it became now dense enough, and all these different things happen. And it's not that you can point to just that there's one thing holding it up, and once we figure out that one thing, it's going to be there. And so accurately predicting, I mean, we can say at a high level all the ways in which we would need certain pieces to actually fit together and be working well enough, but to actually know what's the specific form that they should take and how far away those forms are, I don't have a good read on that. Henrik might. He's got a longer bird perspective than I do, but I find it very hard to predict.
Put it in perspective from the diffusion of innovation. So the pipeline of research and development has stayed constant. I mean, in terms, and that's what scares me by the fact that Europe is literally spending 5 times as much as we are on fundamental research. That's going to kill us later. That's killing our seed corn. But if you think about the diffusion of innovation, how long does it take you to adopt a technology once it's out there? And the diffusion of innovation still, again, runs about 7 to 20 years of a latency in that. And certainly we saw the first autonomous cars, Dickinson Graphing, 1988 we were seeing stuff.
88, yeah.
Yep, and so now we're seeing that latency. But what you can do is cut that time down if you make the technology sufficient that different groups can adapt it and find out what the real use is. And I think that's one of the trends I've heard in all of us saying is that you've got to match the technology with the mission, with the people. And building your technology, your robots, your algorithms where they're more flexible and can be adapted instead of saying, well, people are going to drive like this, or the way they want to be, the perfect wheelchair is this. And there's not a perfect wheelchair. It depends on the person. Having that adaptability will make a difference.
So, and I think if we come back, so I think sort of specific timeline, to me, I still think 15 years out, you're going to see tremendous sort of evolution or revolution in automotive. And it will change many things. We're also seeing today that many kids do not want to own a car. So we have SIP cars, we have all of these different models, so we get much more to a sharing economy, just like we're getting a gig economy. And that, to me, is going to revolutionize. We don't need as many parking lots in Chicago. I don't have to sit in traffic going to the airport because I can now really think about this. So I think that's one of the areas. I think we need, for some of these things, we need tremendous revolutions in basic science. So, and I'm very excited about we're seeing new revolutions in smart materials, in 3D materials that will completely change. I need this for Brenna's exoskeleton. I need materials that I can wear 24/7. I need very different. So I think we can predict very well transportation is going to be revolutionized. A lot of manufacturing with 3D printing is going to get revolutionized. 10 to 15 years out, I'm still predicting that 25 years out, you can imagine a UPS truck coming to you and said, what did you order? And then they will 3D print it in the back of the truck and give it to you. There's no need to have a warehouse anymore. That's really cool.
Can't do that this Christmas.
And unfortunately, it would be much nicer just to have a 3D print and tell the kids, what did you want for Christmas? And then you press the button, and we're done. I don't think we're quite there. But I think we have, for a set of technologies, very clear timelines. And for others, we really need to think about the disruptions.
Great, next question. In the front row here, Lauren.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. In the development of robots which will have a degree of decision-making built into them, and you touched on this earlier, talk a little bit about the interface between the robot learning, robot decision making, and in the long run, morality?
You want to start with the
It's an
ethics?
easy one.
So there's so many decisions to be made. I mean, are you talking about allocating resources? Are you calculating which way your path is going to go? Are you talking about growing up and becoming Skynet and coming back in time to kill Sarah Connor? I think they're bounded. You know, that was a bit facetious, but I do think you've got to think of the context in which the learning and what the bounded rationality is.
But I think the question is more about how do we embed in our algorithms a sense of ethics? What are the rules of ethics that we can embed in our systems in such a way that we not only follow the law, but also the humanities?
And then you're getting into Ron Arkin's argument that,
Right.
that robots are inherently more ethical because they are bounded, they will follow the rules and they will never deviate, and therefore they would never lose their temper and shoot down the people that had killed their comrade.
But I sort of have the counter argument, because if I designed an autonomous driving car today that followed the letter of the law, it would be the sucker on the road, because everybody else would overtake it. And it would
It'd
be
never make
sitting
it through
at
a four-way stop
exactly,
in Texas.
it would be sitting there. So the question is, how do we do this in such a way that you can exist but still be bounded rational and bounded ethics in terms of, to a degree that's reasonable? Yeah. And I think the short answer is we don't know yet.
And it may not be the biggest pressing question. We've got some time to work on that one. And I think in terms of the weaponization of robots, of which there's a lot of debate, and I'm not comfortable with some of the things that we're doing, but we don't argue about a cruise missile. And that is autonomous. And people will die to make sure that the missile is protected and makes those things. So where do we draw?
But at the same time, I think it's very important that, and we're starting to see this, that this is a discussion that should not be carried out by engineers. So it's not a discussion that should be carried out by engineers. They're dangerous people in this. So we need to make sure that we have a much broader conversation about ethics that involves humanities, priests, a very broad set of people. Policy. We can't leave it to the engineers. They can say, "Oh, come on, it's not dangerous," and then we have an accent. So I think it's very important that we have very multidisciplinary discussions about this, and that has only just begun.
But I'm worried about the ethics and morality of things like we've seen like in autism research. I mean, there are a lot of people using robots for that, and it's not 100. Some of the early experiences are like, oh my gosh, maybe that wasn't appropriate. And the same thing, we've got this very Silicon Valley, grab the market regardless of regulations first, and then we'll sort it all out, right? He who's got market share will win, and just like that. And I think that's an aspect that I find more troubling about robotics and ethics, is the way that we're corporately pursuing it rather than so much the ethics of whether or not weaponizing them. I think those are decisions and policy are very important.
Time for just one more question there. But if we could take the question there from the young man in the...
Hi, my name is Akash Pondicherry. I'm a 7th grader in Kenwood Academy High School in the Academic Center. And my question is, if robots start to replace people and take their jobs, won't that lead to job loss and more people going into poverty or becoming homeless?
So it's a good question. And traditionally, whenever we've deployed technology, it's actually led to economic growth. So if you look at it, when we started using automation for building the automotive industry, that led to a lot of jobs that led to basically all of Detroit. The same thing we are now seeing by having very good miniaturized machines. We can build electronics. We couldn't build the kind of electronics we have today if we had to do it with manual labor. So it's very much, so the real question is, how do we make sure we leverage the technology to not only replace labor, but also make sure that we have the dimension of economic growth. But traditionally, whenever we do technology, it will lead to economic growth. We've seen this with electronics, with automotive, with all of these different, but we have to be careful about how we do it.
Great, well thank you very much. A round of applause again for our panel tonight. Thank you for coming.